Hello, yes, I was summoned. I have tried to mention all of you who tagged me below, but if I've forgotten somebody, I am so sorry. My notifications have been kinda hinky all week. So for those of you who don't know me, my name is Gwyn, and the reason that people are probably tagging me in this is I have read every single Wonder Woman solo issue, whether that be titled Wonder Woman itself or Sensational Comics. This video is going to be pretty long in its full answer, so I'm just going to pop a quick TLDW here for those of you who aren't interested in the context and nuance to this. So Diana's truly definitive form, if you believe one can exist, is that of a truly radical woman who typifies the contradictions of femininity whilst truly embracing and loving it in her and others. She loves and she acts out of that love while still embracing the fallibility and flaws of humanity and man's world around her. Her job and her drive comes from the protection of those humans around her. She is the ultimate protector. Her strength is not despite of her love and compassion, but it comes from that love and compassion itself. If needs be, she'll use that love and compassion against others for their own good. Phil Jimenez said it best when he described her as the present. She is wholly focused on the problem and the person in front of her, no matter how big or how small. While she acknowledges that hierarchy and rank exist within humanity, she chooses not to abide by it. She does have her own private desires and wants and loves, but she realises that she will never truly realise them until man's world is fair and free for all, and she's come to peace with that. She is an immovable force who will not let your cruelty stand, even if the only person your cruelty is directed at is yourself. She's also inherently sensual. She has roots in kink that she cannot be separated from. Past that, and here's where we're getting into the context and nuance, I don't actually think that there can be a wholly definitive version of any superhero. These characters have existed for almost a century now, and over time as our culture has shifted, so have they, and that's okay. I do think, however, that we can have generationally specific, definitive versions, so for instance, take Linda Carter's Wonder Woman, for people who grew up with her, or Kevin Conroy for a lot of us when it comes to Batman. I do also think that certain core traits of a previous generation's version of a character might carry over, and I do really enjoy that, but these characters are pretty malleable because they've existed across mediums and are constantly being written and talked about in new stories. It's one of the great things about comics. And with Wonder Woman, because she is such an inherently radical and political character, what that looks like is going to change over time and keep on changing until we live in a post-ism society. Diana's going to keep on shifting and growing and changing until there are no more injustices in man's world, that is, our world, to be met. Take, for instance, Marston's Wonder Woman, who was the definitive version of the character for the first 2 decades of her life. Now feel free to stop me if you've heard this one before, but I would describe a character with a hard and fast no-kill rule who had a place of rehabilitation where they often took their villains. Now despite their villains often escaping this place of rehabilitation and reoffending, they never gave up on them. In their actions they often inspired others, and they were surrounded by a group of plucky teens who often helped them stop the crime. They also had a strong connection to a member of law enforcement who had an unorthodox way of gaining their attention. All of these things describe Wonder Woman and just Wonder Woman in the 1940s. During that era, Batman was quite happily kicking people into acid, breaking their necks, locking them in burning buildings, all whilst cracking jokes about the homicide he'd just committed. Now, quite luckily in my opinion, we've left those pulpier elements of Batman's original characterisation behind, and Wonder Woman has shifted to be a more nuanced character. She no longer has the no-kill clause in Aphrodite's law, and Rehabilitation Island disappeared quite some time ago, although it is still possible for certain villains to be granted freedom of the island, that is Themyscira. The concept of loving submission and the binding of her bracelets being something that reduces her strength is also something that no longer exists in her comics, despite it showing up in basically every single issue of Marston's run. But those elements of her characterisation defined her all the way up until the 1960s, where the Amazons disappeared and we got our first super spy Agent Diana Prince era. Now it is worth noting that I do think Wonder Woman lost her way for a little bit there. Comics Code Authority was in, and whilst I have an awful lot of respect for Dennis O'Neil, his Wonder Woman run really doesn't do it for me, in large part because it makes the wrong assumptions about what makes Diana powerful. There's also some really weird dialogue which is very of the time, which talks about Diana being a lot flightier in her human form because, of course, a normal average human woman couldn't possibly remain that faithful to a man without a marriage, right? Now, I do definitely think that there were some good things to come out of Diana being a super spy and to have her being wholly disconnected from Themyscira, but that writing and that era was definitely let down by the sexism that the writers at the time had in regards to Diana. In fact, there's a reason that when people talk about previous writing for Diana, that Marston's run is referenced, and then people don't tend to talk about it until we get to George Perez's post-crisis run. Speaking of runs which are quite definitive to a lot of comic book fans, Perez's is definitely up there. What he did was bring Diana back to the times, so to speak. He brought in elements of the second wave feminist movement, he gave her more radical political aspects in terms of her being a diplomat, and he also grounded her more by bringing in elements of actual Grecian and actual Roman cultures. Now, just a quick disclaimer before anybody gets mad at me, I am aware that ancient Greece and ancient Rome are two wholly different cultures and identities. However, due to Marston's mix and matching of that, for reasons we'll get into slightly later, I am referring to both of them here. One of the lovely things Perez did with the Amazons and with Themyscira is he showed them going out into man's world and seeing what worked for the ancient cities and then taking it back, and without the encasings of sexism and prejudice in man's world, made them work for the Amazons. These Amazons aren't warriors, they are scholars, they are writers. Yes, they might fight, but that is not their primary purpose, and they're all trained in everything. They are all jacks of all trades. Now, it is worth noting that a lot of authors do miss a trick when it comes to Diana and her connection to the Greek pantheon. Oftentimes they try and make it true to the myth. It was certainly something that was tried in New 52. And ultimately, Marston was born in the Victorian era, and we all know how the Victorians love to rub their grubby little hands all over previous concepts to make them their own new thing. Marston's intent in bringing in Aphrodite and bringing in Mars wasn't to be true to the myths, it was what often happened in Victorian culture, which was these gods were used as reflections of gender and gender politics in the time. And because our understanding of gender and gender concepts is absolutely nowhere close to what the ancient Greeks had, if you try too hard to play by the myths as they've been presented to us, you can lose your way with Diana. There is very much a happy medium you can hit there whilst acknowledging the myths and the pantheon that you're taking from, whilst still acknowledging the gender politic element of it. After all, Diana is a marriage of Themysciran and man's world's cultures. Why would we not engage in a little mix and match? It's also really fitting that the pantheon, which is frequently referred to as the most human of the gods, is the one that was selected here. I suppose you could say this question is a little funny to a point, because if you look at the core things that made up Diana in the 1940s versus Diana now, she's actually remained more consistent than somebody like Bruce or Kal-El has, in large part because the radical political ideas which were talked about via Marston in his comic are not yet realised. We are not in a post-sexism, post-racism, post-anything world, unfortunately. And until we are, the core, the heart of Diana, whilst it's constantly shifting, will always tend back to the radical and the political. It's also worth noting that even the best of Diana's stories often belie who she is, in large part because we are human and the people writing about her have conscious and unconscious biases. Obviously, we can't separate her from the war propaganda element of her roots either. And as a result, a lot of Marston's early stories have horrific anti-Japanese sentiment within them. His form of feminism was also quite close to second wave feminism, which tends towards a lot of gender essentialism. Perez's has awful anti-Arab sentiment with the ban of MGDOW. It has suddenly occurred to me that despite cutting this down, this still needs a part 2. Oh,